All right. We made it.
We did.
We did it.
We made it.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah.
I'm glad we are here. This is a very beautiful space that I'm always very grateful to enter. If I'm assuming that everyone who's watching this has already seen our episode because I will have already gone out, so they should already kind of know who you are. Palika Andrade. I was trying to come up with how to give you a title or like a this is who this is, and it just seems impossible to encapsulate because of everything that you are and everything that you are to the community and who you are to your friends. Like, it just seems like it's too big to say. So I asked you to explain yourself, and you said bossy. Yeah.
And that's the title, bossy.
And I think we can all agree that is correct. But you also said Āina.
Āina, yes.
Which is a term that is unfamiliar to me of what does Āina mean? Like, how does one earn this prestigious title? Is it...
Oh.
How do you get to be a Āina?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you kind of just accept it and kind of settle into it, I think. I don't know. Because we're in this world of titles, right? Like, what are we? What do we call you? Who are you? Like, who do you represent? And I think all of the things that have come through, because words are important. I don't choose them well all the time, but words are important.
I've never chosen them well.
Right? But when we really get into the weeds and we just kind of look at things, like when we talk about caring for our places and caring for our communities, there wasn't a word that fit, right? We have kupa Āina, right? We have kama Āina, we have that everyone's using right now. Kama Āina rates. And it kind of just doesn't fit. It didn't feel right. And my father, along with other people before me within this world of, I'm talking about like the academic and all of those kinds of things in community worlds, Āina has been coming up quite a bit. It's come up in those formal settings as well as just in community, and it kind of settles real nice. So in the use of Āina for me, I talk about Āina as community. It is everything that feeds us, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. Right, ka'ai'ana, right? The squishing of that term and those words. So I know we use it as a reference to land, but Āina are really like everything that encompasses our community. Everything that we recognize as feeders. And in the relationship of Hawaii, anything that we reciprocate and have this back and forth relationship with. So Āina, in a very summarized way, is community, people, place, natural resources. And Hoa is a friend. So in relationships that we have with Āina and with each other, it's very familial and it's very personal. And manager is not a good term. Steward is a horrible term too, right? Because it gives like a hierarchy thing, and yeah.
I can't wait for.
I know everyone's gonna be like, "Oh my God, steward! That's our word. It's a horrible word."
You hear that, Ford? Palika doesn't like that word. Malia's gonna be so happy to hear that because they were just having an argument at dinner of like the place of human in the ecosystem. Because my girlfriend Malia.
Yeah.
Did you meet her yet?
And I haven't met her yet.
She's amazing. I'm excited for that day.
Yeah.
But now that she's dating me, she's entered the world of killing things. And it's like, okay, we're going hunting, we're going diving. And it's a very foreign concept to a lot of people. And she's at this stage where not all of us, but at least I went through as well, where you're balancing this taking a life thing, where you're like, okay, that's weird. Okay, but it's invasive, so it's okay. Oh, but it's just that idea where you start to try to justify. And so she's in that world of like trying to understand why, like, we're the most invasive. In her head, she's like, okay, well, we're invasive. Humans are invasive. Why are we? So she's like, they just had that whole conversation and she's finding that balance and having that internal conversation, and they were fighting over
lovely
dinner.
Nice. Good.
Side thought.
Healthy debates.
Yeah,
Healthy debates. No, but it's important. Again, right? We can use steward because I think everyone kind of accepts the use of it. But when we really, really think about the representation of that word, it doesn't really define us. Another one that just pisses me off is this. Sorry, I'm going to piss off a lot of Hawaiians here. He ali'i ka Āina he kawa ke kanaka. And like people like to spit that out as if it's just like the badge of honor. I'm just like, that's not my relationship. Because so the translation of that is, right?
No, I know.
Right?
We did an episode.
Land is a chief.
Yeah.
And he kawa ke kanaka, and kanaka are slaves. In Western communities and Western relationships, saying that to that kind of can get people to understand a little bit more of the relationship. Us believing it is totally different. So the use of that to explain ourselves within Western constructs, use it. Because it kind of brings them a little bit closer to, oh, yeah. We're not the elite here. We're in service. But for us to believe that lie is kind of like, it's a lie. That's not our relationship. We are not servants. We serve. Very, very different words. In ali'i. And then we have this really weird misunderstanding of what ali'i are. I just stumbled on this little clip, and this guy in a classroom was trying to teach people about ali'i, and he had this fully European examples of, and I'm sitting there going, oh, fired. Don't let him teach anymore. Because ali'i, like if you want to really look at our relationships, right? Our relationships are familial. At the end of the day, they are. How they were applied in some ways, there was terrible, and some ways were beautiful. There's going to have the whole range. But the relationship is that of family. Ali'i's jobs were to tend to the family, to keep balance in the world as a parent would. And that's why we refer to them as parents, even if they were little children, right? So there's this, we got to understand the relationship. And then, so when people use that, I understand what message they're trying to send. But when you internalize that and you start to get our people to believe that's a relationship, I'm like, no, I'm not a servant. I serve, and I will serve forever. And the land, and Āina is not land, right? It's everything. The land is not our chief. The land is this elder sibling that we cherish and we tend to because it tends to us. Kind of like a chief, but like that misinterpretation. It's not hitting the bullseye. It's hitting the target, but not like, so I think it's really, as we mature in our relationships to all of these concepts in place, then we need to also start to recognize that as well. Can you hear the beeping? I'm so sorry.
No. They can't.
Okay.
No one, like, it's
no
just,
beeping?
it'll be, but yeah.
So anyway, sorry, I got off track, but that's the other thing.
Yeah, so,
it's
but
like,
for you, and I
so
love that
Hawaiian.
I love that you say that it's like, it's on target. It's not the bullseye, but it's on target, because I think it's important not to like alienate too far if people's intentions are good. But, so, okay, yeah, you got me there. So
they can have good intentions and kill a whole race.
I was,
Still, you can't. Oh, but anyway.
Yeah. But whole Āina for you is that bullseye.
Whole Āina for me right now, in the journey of my maturity and my understanding, and in my relationship to the world, it is the best that I know right now. It might change in 5 years.
Yeah.
But right now.
See, that's a good way. That's a good way to use words correctly there. I like the way you put that. You're always very good at.
I go back to bossy all the time, though.
Doing the bossy well.
And then bossy, and then it's interchangeable.
Perfect. It's a great balance. I love I've said this off camera a million times. I'll say it on camera. I love your version of bossy because I find it very, like you do it with like in a very calm and a way that I want to listen and follow. like I also have an admiration for you, so it's not like out of left field, like someone is telling me what to do. Like I'll just be like, yeah, of course, anything you say is what I'm gonna do. But I love the way that you lead is so it's just very nice to follow. Like it's not like bossy, like mean girl, or like I'm so sick of hearing you talk to me right now. Like I love like the way you say it.
There's plenty that are just tired of hearing me talk.
I guess I don't come
There's
around
gonna be a
enough.
bunch of people going like, we don't want to follow her. Yeah, she can stop talking already.
I'm sure there's a fleet of them.
There is.
Yeah.
There is.
Well,
Including my children.
Hit them
my
in the
children are at the
comments.
top of the list. Like, Mom.
Well, I'll just keep coming around sporadically, and I'll just always be in the very. She's the perfect amount of bossy.
Yeah, funny.
But Āina, so to be a friend of the land, is how you would categorize yourself, and
A companion.
a companion.
A companion.
And I think that you're not only. I think that you're such a great companion because, like you were saying, you know how to be of service. And you do that so well, not just to, well, I guess you can just say to Āina, because that is our community.
Yeah.
And to your friends and to the people who know you, we're all lucky to know you and to have you around. And yeah, we appreciate
thanks. No, it's a two-way street, definitely. Know me, but also put up with me.
So I feel like I hit the sweet spot. I don't know if you just listen, guys. Just listen to her and it's all good.
Oh yeah, see, right? See, you know.
But yeah, that's how I'll just come around every once in a while. So how does Āina tie into Āina Momona? Which is not only, that is a term in its own, but it's also a nonprofit that you started, correct?
It's the vision or the goal of our nonprofit.
Okay.
Yeah, so the nonprofit is Namaka Onauna.
Okay, yes.
And those missions and visions. The vision is Āina Momona. And in our use and the use I use in everything else too is thriving in productive communities of people, place, and natural resources, right? So it kind of gives us a really, really broad reach and kind of broad activities. We can do anything because as long as it's supporting that production and that thriving, right? And again, the words matter. We're not here to survive, we're here to thrive. So just changing our community's kind of language. We're not shooting for the survival, we're shooting for the thriving, and we'll hit survival, but it's so much more further than that.
How would you define like if you were to, like, what is your goal, like, as far as creating a community that's thriving here on Kauai? What would that look like to you?
It's hard. I don't think I even know. I think I have visions of and theories of what it could look like. I don't think a tangible end goal is even possible, like not possible to get to, but to be able to describe that, because I think it's ever changing, right? Like what's good for me in my 20s is not going to be good for me in my 30s, is not going to be good for me in my 40s, 50s, 60s as an elder. So you know what I mean? So I can't say like, this is what it's going to look for. So what I can do is I can have an idea of what I feel the relationship is, and what my relationships are, and how I view traditional relationships, and how that can be implemented and applied and real today. And I can just work towards that. So Āina Momona, again, thriving communities of people, place, and productive and thriving communities of people, place, and natural resources. What I know about that comes from what I know about relationships. And as we know, Western relationships are really invasive. So people in general, that argument your girlfriend guys are having, talked about humans are invasive. Yes, how they behave today. The ones that are participating actively, us included, in these Western behaviors are very invasive. The beautiful thing about Indigenous cultures, and not always, but a lot of the time, is their existence and the way they walk through the world was not so invasive, right? Because the best definition of invasive was when something disturbs the natural flow of the area or the thing, right? So how is an invasive species, but it's not an invasive species if it doesn't disturb. So a lot of these invasive species, if managed, wouldn't be so invasive, right? So there's levels of that. So what gets introduced or what is there that is starting to decrease the ability for that ecosystem to thrive? And kind of that's like a really general summarizing of what the best definition of invasive. So indigenous people, yes, we did have some invasive behaviors. Of course, there was no perfection there. But I think in the success of history and the provenness of history, we had the closest kind of idea of what balance could look like and thriving could look like and balance in the world. And that goes back to relationship. The fact that a lot of indigenous people see the world as family or as the bottom of a long lineage of introduction into the world, and just realizing that we are not at the top, we are at the bottom. I think that is a common thread of indigenous people, and that understanding that and living and abiding by that helped keep balance in the world and helped to keep our invasive nature at a minimum. Right? There was that familial relationship. The beautiful way that a lot of our cultures showed wealth by getting rid of theirs. Right? The potlatch in the Northwestern. We had kind of versions of that here, right? People passed by, even with the little bit of food we gave, right? It was really the giving part, right? So there's all of these relationships that indigenous people have given us examples of. So Āina Momona, when I'm envisioning for that, it's trying to understand those relationships and how to bring those kinds of balances back into the world. And sometimes it's and in that action, it's simple as re-establishing relationships. So before we can even get, like, let's just say, natural resources, right? Watershed health, super important for other reasons. Pristineness wasn't balanced in locally. But globally, because we now live in a global environment, pristineness and patches are necessary because we've been so invasive in others. But it's not the end goal because there's still a division between the relationship, right? Museum kind of relationship, behave, don't behave, and not a balanced behavior, right? So there's all of, I guess I'm trying to say is like, I can't tell you it looks like A, B, C, D. But what I can and try to contribute to is understanding the relationships and trying to infuse our world in actions and jumps that reflect the essence of those relationships. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's hard to explain.
Yeah.
So what I recognize now is our people are fractured. You cannot have fractured people. And I've contributed to some of that too, because I was a stupid 20-year-old and I have like really hard ideas of what is right and wrong, right? So, but how do we get through that? So right now, the easiest way, maybe not the end goal, but the medicine, if you will, that we are trying to work on and applying in the work that I do, I refer to as PEVA, because we have all of these fractures. We have fractures between people and people. We have fractures between people and place. We have fractures in our government. We have fractures, like there's all this distrust. There's a lot of things. And what has served our people in the 70s and 80s was the hard-hitting, like really aggressive, physically aggressive too, in-your-face kind of, what is ku'e? What is the English word for ku'e? Protest, right? Kaho'olave, language movement, hokule'a, like really, really sovereignty, really, really powerful, aggressive actions. And I look at that as a super necessary step to shake and to stop. Like shake the world up, get the attention, but like everybody is in a full stop. Like, oh shit, we're doing something. What's happening? But it's not the medicine in the progression of healing. And I believe the medicine now is peva. We have so many fractures that, you know what peva are?
No.
They're butterfly stitches. So they're like these things. These things right here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they're butterfly stitches in woodwork. And they're just meant, you know, when wood dries and they crack, to stop the crack from continuing, a fracture, you insert a peva, a butterfly stitch. And this beautiful thing happens because like you stop the crack, but then you make it more strong than it was before. And it's actually like this beautiful scar or tattoo or whatever you want to refer to it, right? So it actually, peva aren't like the Band-Aid. They're actually inserted to really strengthen these fractures. So we need more peva. And so this idea of inserting peva in our community and anywhere we can and encouraging peva, sometimes you got to cut out the rotten areas, but most times we have to stop the cracks and we have to do that. So that's a lot of the work I do is trying to fill needs and fill gaps and remind ourselves. And it's really funny because people that know me, I'm very blunt. Like I know how you say you appreciate it, but not a lot of people do. But where that's my job. A lot of the time my job is the reminders. I'm the guy that nobody wants to talk to until the 11th hour when things are going bad. And they're just like, what do we do, Pelika? And I'm like, I told you this 10 years ago. And I'm not going to do, I told you so, but like, are you ready for this? And then, right? But there's all of this. So, but the peva. And so, again, long story. I know you asked about what does it look like. Right now, we just have to heal. We have to stop the bleeding, but it's not only stop the bleeding to stop the bleeding. So we lose a leg, we have to stop the bleeding so we walk again, kind of analogies. So what it looks like in the future, like I can't even vision for that right now because it's the needs will change in 10 years, in 5 years. But what I can do is I can help restore relationships. I can help encourage and support understanding the world through a familial lens. I can help and support enhancing the idea of service and sharing of wealth. And that's hard in today's world because everyone's talking about generational wealth. But what does that look like in an Indigenous community? Or not even an Indigenous community, because we have to stop that too, because if we want the world to succeed, we need to all kind of offer the medicine to everybody. So how do we talk about generational wealth collectively and not just have the head start, like the one family or the one person shooting off, but how do we send off the exploration, but bring for safe ground and then bring everybody along? And I think, so I don't know how to answer that question if I even did, but it's a lot.
I liked where you went though in a lot of those. I feel like there's so many offshoots we could go down that are all very interesting. But I guess I'll just have to say, what does from an Indigenous perspective, what does like looking at the world through a familial lens look like? Like kind of like if you could break that down, like I don't even have the correct vocabulary to correctly even ask you this question, but like you're almost like flipping the world on its head right now, just saying like, you know, the way we're looking at this is all wrong. Like we're not at the top, we're at the bottom, and like we're one big like how does the like being I guess getting that connection with Āina and making your like this familial connection you're talking about, how does one take those steps?
Oh gosh, you're asking super easy questions, Sam.
Well, you're giving super easy answers.
I like just trying to say basic summary, right? Like family. There is no like, there's gonna be times when, okay, so in the genealogy of things, for Hawaii, we were born last, right? We had all of these births of Akua, which in reference, if we wanted to pin them on something, it's not gods. They represent all of our elementals, right? They represent all of those things. So we have the birthing of all of our elementals and and then we have the other things like the coral polyps and then fish and then all the birthing of everything in the ocean. And then they have their equivalent in the land, right? So at the end of the day, we are the younger siblings to all the plants and animals, all the creepers and all the crawlies and all the swimmers. And I think what more people, if they don't know this already, and they should, we come under, and the last under the line of Haloa Nakalauka which was the first child, human child born in one genealogy, because we have several. Mm-hmm. In this genealogy, he was the human child that was born as a stillborn and buried. A kalo came up, and then the second child was Haloa, which is where 2 feet peoples came from, right? Mm-hmm. So just looking at in the descents, these rate of order of birth, we're the younger sibling. And so to break it down super easy, as a younger sibling, what is your job?
To listen?
To listen to your older siblings, right? Uh-huh. And serve. And you get to be a brat once in a while, right? Because we're brats all the time. And it's okay. And we get to be a brat, but at the end of the day, when older sibling goes, shut up, I told you to do this, you just like tuck tail and be like, I'm so sorry. Uh-huh. I won't do that again. And you go do it, right? And we've lost just that, right? Our world is just screaming at us that it needs things. It needs attention. It needs space. It needs like all of our elder siblings have these needs that we have not been fulfilling lately. Mm-hmm. And we've just been this spoiled brat children, younger siblings. And at some point, the world is going to be like, give us dirty lickings, right? So I think that's what I mean when familial. We are the younger sibling. And we get some perks from it too. Mm-hmm. But we also have to remember our responsibilities to listen. So what are the winds telling us? What are the rains telling us? What are our animals telling us? And are we actually making some behavior changes to accommodate the needs that they have to become productive, to thrive as well? And right now we've offset that thriving ability for them. And that's why too, right? We get into all kinds of stuff. I work in marine resources and management, and I like several hats as well. And some people are like, but what about this? Like, that's not Hawaiian. And I'm just like, actually it is. In the essence of it, we have taken up space. And that in the tradition and the relationship of Hawaii, we have taken up too much space. Mm-hmm. So I don't care if it's not a Hawaiian native, be pre-contact thing. We need to give that space back. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? We don't have permanent closures, like protected areas, like how they do in the upper watershed and they do out in the marine environment, Papahana Mokuakea. And for some of the protected areas, I'm just like, absolutely not, stop it, don't do that. But in other places like Papahana Mokuakea, people are like, well, we never used to close down, that's our native Hawaiian rights. And I'm like, no, it's our native Hawaiian relationship to address the fact that as a collective global society, we've taken up too much space. Mm-hmm. It is our traditional responsibility to bring balance back to that. And that looks different if you want to pick and choose the tangible things that were that our ancestors did instead of the reasons why they did it. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when we talk about family. Mm-hmm. It's bringing a little bit more balance back to our spoiledness. Mm-hmm.
Quick UA break.
UA break.
It rained briefly. We covered everything. We're back. Don't remember where we were. We had conversations since. But yes, glad to have you here. And I would like to maybe briefly pivot. I know we're talking about indigenous systems and Āina Momona and Peva.
Peva, yeah.
And healing, and that kind of ties into a question I was curious to ask you, which would be like, you know, if you could like heal like one thing, like if there's one thing you could snap your fingers and boom, problem solved there. What do you think you would choose?
Us.
Oh,
If one thing does that count?
yeah, that totally counts. But how
Because
do we
if
fix?
if we fix us, because we're at the root of every single problem.
Okay.
I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, you don't know. Yeah. Okay.
But if
Would
I
it-
had, if I could reset one thing, it would be the human species.
do you think
Then
you
everything else would just fall into place.
and if you could and with your knowledge right now in this moment in time, you feel the best way to do that is with these indigenous systems and familial values of indigenous peoples. Like you think that's a good foundation to build off of.
I think really digging past the what our ancestors did to why and what drove them to do it. Yes. I think the what that they did is a reflection of the values that they held, the relationships and values that they held in the circumstances of that time. So it's really hard to say that, oh, we have to do this because they did this 200 years ago. What they did 200 years ago probably was not what they did 400 years prior. Because the circumstances changed. As they've changed today, we can't do the same things that they did, but we can reflect and mirror the essence of why they did it and the relationships that they were trying to maintain. And I think if we did that, we could put actions into place that may not look like our ancestor, may not look like the actual thing that our ancestor did, but as long as it was put into practice and it was inserted into our lives to maintain the relationships that we held, then I think it, yes.
I really like the way you put that, because I do think that sometimes when we talk about, when we have this conversation about Indigenous and Hawaiian and what our ancestors used to do, it all seems very, I don't want to say, I'll try to use my words carefully here, but it just seems fictitious. It seems like you're painting it's
romanticized.
It's romanticized.
It's romanticized.
Yeah, and I'm like,
And we all
where's
do it.
Yeah,
It's okay.
yeah,
But-
and it's
yeah.
But I like the way you put it, because it brings it into the now of like, no, we need to operate with what is on the table now. Like we need to operate within our community now and like use our own brains and our own foresight and by you like, but bringing in values that.
And remembering what drove us to do what we did before. Because what were they trying to maintain? And there's so many examples that we have, but instead of them digging, it's not them. Instead of we, because I do it too. Instead of us digging past, and just blindly replicating, we kind of like dilute it or even miss the mark. So like one example is, there's so many examples, but one example that I got faced with the clash of that system is I applied for these permits to fish in a no fishing area for subsistence. And in it, strategically for our people, I just every year add another species of fish. Because they have to get used to understanding that that's the familial relationship. Like, how do we partake of a place and they partake of us, right? There's all of this partaking, this Āina. There's all of this feeding back and forth, and that's part of it. So like getting opihi and getting limu and getting fish and getting all of this stuff, I just keep adding stuff. And the first time I added spearfishing to it, mostly it was the intertidal take, and then I added spearfishing. And one of the reviewers came back and was just like, well, you talk about it's a traditional fishing permit and 3 prongs are not traditional. And I was like, subsistence and sustainable fishing is my practice. You do not get to define how I do it. And I think that's kind of the world we live in today. We look at and we're using Native Hawaiian practices to help change laws, which are needed. But, and I understand why we do it. And it's because it's an easy thing to say when we talk about, no, we can throw net or we can lay net, and that's a traditional practice, or you can't get octopus, you know, like from this certain area or whatever. And that's just the things that they did.
Yeah.
They fished using those methods, but they actually fished based on the balance of that system. So to get a step forward, let's do that, right? But that's also going to hurt us if we stay there. So we need that first step. So I 100% agree. Let's take that first step. Yeah, we will only fish with this. This is, you know, let's get our people back into that space, because that's important. We need our people to be able to connect and to have some freedoms and to have some presence and have to have engagements. And if that is the way to do that, let's do that. But if you're going to stop there and start to use that as the belief system that we are basing tradition on, and then now we are weakening our relationship, because it wasn't about us using a throw net to get fish. It was our ability to understand the ebb and flow of fishery production and harvest within that. And we're not doing that.
Yeah. So you're saying like a lot of the focus is on the what
And
they
not the
did.
why.
And you need to evaluate why they did it
Why they did it.
and then act.
Yeah. So like hukilaus, they did it. And they did it because there were hukilaus are crazy cool, right? Like, yeah, you had fish that came in and spawned in. But you also had a lead fisherman that understood, like, oh, last year we didn't have so many schools. Maybe he rested it this year. And he had the power to do that because he was trusted to understand balance and production. And then he said, oh, no, go time, right? Call everybody. So, like, hukilau is about fishing and feeding, but it's about, like, you have to understand, like, the survival of our people and the thriving of our people was this interdependentness that happened. You didn't have interdependentness unless you had working together. So hukilau or those kinds of surrounds, that is a mechanism of not only feeding our people physically by having fish, but it's strengthening what I call, those are the glue moments. They strengthen the glue of community. Right? Like, you call everybody and everybody has to come, and then like you have the laughter and you have the direction and people are working together. So it's just what happens when people don't see each other for months? That's what's happening now, right? Like, you live next door. How many of us talk to our neighbor? But if you have to work with them every day, you're going to behave differently. The glue will be stronger. You're going to like choose to not snap at your neighbor if they were a little bit too loud at 9 o'clock, because tomorrow you might need a banana from them. Like, you know, or you might need their help cleaning the water, or you might need help doing the pulling collar. Like, you know what I mean? So there's these beautiful, we have to look at the whys of all of this stuff. And even the whys of ali'i and the whys of kawa and the whys of, we just look at the thing and we don't push past. And for me, the lessons are in the why. Like, I love digging into sitting in what I believe is the space that they held, and be like, how would I act? Not as konohiki, as an example, as I understand it today, but as konohiki, with the responsibilities that were real yesterday. And it changes how I would even behave and how I would judge today the decisions that we have records that they made. And so it's really, really, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. I forgot your question, but yeah. What was your question?
What was my question, guys? I think I asked, what the heck? I was so entranced with what you were saying.
We started with one thing.
Yeah.
If you could change and heal, I said
Yeah.
people.
I feel like
'Cause
that
we've
was
messed
before the
everything up.
rain. That was, well, either way, I loved it. I was just in. But yeah. Yeah.
You want to hear one more cool thing about Konehiki? Sitting in Konehiki? So if you look at ali'i as their job to hold balance in the world, ultimate job. And there's a hierarchy, right? So you have your ali'i nui, the big guy, and he has to employ people that can help him balance spirituality. So he has all these kahuna, right? And then he has to maintain what I just, like, people would probably roll their eyes or cringe at this, like, service, right? What cell phone service, right? You need like good service, and what gives you good service to akua and to do the things, like that's mana, right? Like you need to make sure that you have a lot of, like, you have to uphold mana within your lineage and within your line, so you have the best service to be able to do all of the balance stuff, right? So you employ kahuna, and they help you and advise you in the balance of spirituality and in these other spaces and how to move forward in time. And then you have konohiki to help you balance people and community and that kind of stuff, right? So understanding the function and the why of ali'i, it's like their function was to familially hold balance in the world. And we had good ones and we had bad ones. And when we had bad ones, we got rid of them. And we had good ones, we praised them, and we wanted them to come live forever and ever and ever, right? So again, the spectrum of that. Konohiki were one of those ali'i under the big guys that in small locations held balance. And so you have to think about it. And I'm a parent, right? So I'm sitting as a parent. If I was responsible not only to hold the social balance, but the natural balance of this ahupua'a, like, how could I do that when knowing people are people? People are petty. People are jealous. There's some hard workers. There's some lazy guys, right? Like, there's all the spectrum of people. How do you keep balance? So you do have to keep some level of separation from you and people, right? So you can't be buddy-buddy. As a parent, right? You can't, like, I'm sorry, parents that are like, oh, my daughter's my best friend. Like, my kids are not my best friends. I am their parent. It's my job to be their parent, right? We can be friends. There's a friendly, like, there's things, but at the end of the day, I'm their parent. So young age, especially, right? So like, there's that, because what happens with kids when you have your friends, you start to push boundaries, and you put like, but success of the community depends on you holding those lines, right? You need to keep the awai clean, right? So you bring everybody here. And then there's this beautiful thing. I don't know if you know about it. Like they could reserve a species for a year as their, they called it an ia ho'omalu. And they could take fish or like even things on land, and they could reserve it for a year as I don't want to use kapu because kapu is not the appropriate word for that. Kapu is in relation to mana and not to natural resources. So let's just say last year there was this huge surge of o'opu. Everybody was eating it. There might have been a little bit too much harvesting. And let's just we're not seeing the numbers. We didn't see the spawn that we're used to seeing. So we're going to rest this. So the konohiki could claim i'a ho'omalu and put a rest on o'opu. But when it's just like candy, right? You're putting everybody on this diet, right? You're reserving it. And in today's translation, I've heard people go, oh, they could make it kapu because they just only wanted to eat it themselves. And I'm just like, as a parent, maybe. Yeah. Maybe I want to eat ice cream in peace. But I'm not going to have ice cream in the home for me personally. But I can't have my kids eating it every day. So in my mind, if I had to sit in that space and I saw o'opu going low and I had to put in i'a ho'omalu, I would. Not for my personal gain and not for me to eat, but because because at the end of the day, my job is to keep balance in the world. And then 6 months into the year, right, people start seeing big o'opu all over, and you start to see a lot of recruitment and a lot of presence of o'opu, and people are like, oh, greedy, our chief, right? Hawaii's greedy. How come we see plenty, but he not? And then as a parent, you can go, I see a lot of o'opu. You know what I'm gonna do? Just give a little treat to the community. You call your fishermen, farmers, whatever that can catch o'opu, and you assign them. I need you to catch this much, and we're gonna have a party, and we're gonna invite everybody to come, and everybody can eat o'opu and get that ono out of them, but you still don't lift it because you still have to practice that, because 6 months isn't enough to see the health of and the balance of that population, right? So there's this i'aho omalu in the function of how we understand land management and natural resource management now, and the function of monarchy and royalty, whatever you want to call it, chiefdoms. People jumped to the conclusion that they were selfish, that they only reserved it for themselves for this reason. There was some for kapu, for mana reasons, but this was natural resource management. And I'm just like, no, for me, if I had that position and I was at the end of the day responsible for the balance, because at the end of the year, if there was famine and people weren't eating, guess who's replaced by death? Me. So not only is it as a good ali'i, my responsibility to make sure there's production happening into and generationally, not just this year, generationally. I'm putting these things in place. So there's a loophole or some freedom to navigate it. And it's not so strict, but there's still some control in it. And when you look at it that way, it's just like, oh yeah, okay, that seems and sits well with me. So we have to explore those ways. And I might be totally wrong, possible. But if you're looking from a parent, that's something I would do. And I probably did it in my house. Right? Like, no, you can't have candy every day. But there's a bowl up there.
Don't touch it.
Don't touch it. Yeah. But once in a while, if you do your chores and you behave and you blah, 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 then yes, we can have a treat together and share it.
I first, I think, heard about this practice. It's funny enough, not here at home, even though it's well practiced here and all over Polynesia. But I think I heard about it when I was in Tahiti working with the coral gardeners. And I had the privilege of sitting down with this old timer who like mo'orea generational. And he was explaining all of the cycles and practices in which they would take fish and not take fish, and for lack of a better word, put kapu on this and like, okay, we're not touching this because they're spawning now, and this is like having that full understanding. And I think it all, since then it's come to my attention having conversations about land and land ownership, and I think land being taken away sometime in the 1800s because like Hawaiians would be letting it rest, and Western mindset would come and be like, you're not using this land, you're not being productive, we're taking it, and then being like, no, this is resting. Like, so it's that. That was the first time that I was kind of brought into this idea of like, oh yeah, letting things rest, and that kind of makes me want to go into
Kuleana.
Kuleana.
Yeah.
And how do you view Kuleana as? I feel like I feel like we've all gotten a good idea of one of your pillars of knowledge. And if I'm, from my perspective, I feel like you have 3 really strong pillars of knowledge. 1 being what you've learned here at home. 2 being you are a well-traveled individual who has had the pleasure of entering into a lot of different indigenous spaces and kind of got to take knowledge from those areas.
Take. I call it remembering.
Okay.
We remember together because it's familiar. It's shared.
Yeah. And is Kuleana, is that something that's very, very much so shared and
like Kuleana lands or Kuleana in responsibility? In
responsibility.
In responsibility. So words. Words again, right? So so the word responsibility, Kuleana, right? We hear it all the time. And it's really funny because how it kind of like segues into what we know as Kuleana lands is actually Kuleana is like responsibility, but it's also shares. It's the share of the work. What is your share in the work? What is your share in the land? What is your share in the family? What is your share in the meal? It's the shareholders. And so there's a bunch of stuff there. And then there's layers of Kuleana. Beautiful words for it is kaumaha arluhi. And that's not just like, so kuleana is like go wash the dishes, right? Let's just share in the household work. Go wash the dishes, do the yard, do all of that. That for me is like kuleana. Go do the report, work in the office, answer the phone. And then there's luhi, and then there's kaumaha. And I've heard both terms. I haven't dove really into it to understand what's the difference. But the way I kind of look at it is the luhi and kaumaha are just another lifelong commitment of responsibility. And that's kind of what you see. The easy ones are halau, kumuhula. Tending to a hula halau is not, and you just did a series on this, right? I wouldn't call that kuleana. I would call that luhi. That's not something like, that's not chores. There is a like parenting. It's a luhi or a kaumaha. And they kind of had negative connotations in today's world, but luhi is, and kaumaha, it's a tired, but it's also, and a weight, but it's also, that's just like, it's an honoring that you hold that. And people hold it differently. But like, so kumuhula, our olohe with our martial arts, like there's all of these, that's different from kuleana. And I think I am maturing, if you will, into this luhi of trying to understand and hold safe spaces in support of Āina Momona. And it doesn't look like halau hula, or it doesn't look like those obvious, but I do believe they're in today's time and what is necessary today. We need more people to carry luhi or kaumaha in. And there's a beautiful community that are doing it in various ways, and people doing it. So kuleana, I kind of wanted to mature that a little bit in those words. But it comes from, then you talk about like land transfer and how did that happen, and Hawaiians giving it away and not really, or taking away. So, and why we're doing what we're here.
Yeah.
In Pila'a.
Yeah, let's talk about how we're in this piece of land right here.
So I'm gonna, like, it's huge history. I'm trying to like summarize it as best as I can, right? Foreign desires, right? Privatization of land. We technically held land in common before, if we can say that. It was a shared responsibility and a shared kuleana. There were different roles and responsibilities of how that land was held. Ali'i being the parent, right? And then the divisions of districts and Ahupua'a and Ili and all of that. 1800s, in the mid 1800s, there was huge pressure to privatize the best tools that our ali'i had at that time. They were, I can't say what they were, but using what they had at the time, they created what is the mahele, and that divided out the lands in the attempt to privatize. And we can have all these judgments, but at the end of the day, we don't know what they were thinking. We don't know in what space but the tools that they had, I have to believe that they did the best they could. And what that looked like was a third to the chiefs, a third to the government, and a third to the people. So the chiefs and how land was held traditionally was chiefs had their sections and people lived in it. And their job was to keep that section, and people had their house and their ag and their lo'i within it. And within these sections, they could easily move to collect all of their resources, which doesn't say that they couldn't go into others. There are some beautiful examples of how the same system exists in other islands in the Pacific, and how other people move through and collect from open areas, but they will come and tithe to the leadership of that ahupua'a yearly. And I think that's kind of what we forget here. We maintained our boundaries, but we did flow in and out because there was marriages and relationships and all kinds of stuff happening. So traditional leaders in Mahele got their claims. And so once our ali'i had their claims, and then King Kamehameha did his claim, and then he turned a big portion of it over to the state, right, become government lands. So you had government lands, and then you had ali'i lands. And all of the big districts and Ahupua'a were divvied out by all those claims. So that claim process happened first. And then right after that, then the Kuleana Act came in, and all the maka'inana, or commoners, all of the maka'inana were able to claim the tracts of land that they were in. And that's kind of where it extra was effed up. Because that's what you're talking about. There were lands that were fallow and rested. And again, and it was Ali who pushed back. So like, again, like with the tools, like I don't think they realized the permanency of those decisions because they never had it before. Like, how do you... And I know that. I cannot believe that they would have done that on purpose. So when people came in and said, hey, no, I have this right here. And Ali actually said, no, you're not using it right now. They're like, yeah, but like it's fallow. And Ali pushed back on that. But I can't believe they did that for... If they knew, I think if they knew what today would look like, they would have just been like, no, yep, 20 feet out from your property. Like, that's your lines, right? But, so anyway, these Kuleana lands were given or claimed. They now went into a tax kind of... We always had taxes. Makahiki was taxes. But a more formal taxes like governments do. And before you could pay with pigs and livestock, and then it transitions into money. So people with that, so stepping back in their claims, they had to go through the whole court process. They had to claim, get witnesses that this is one boundary and one boundary. So families were able to claim a residential, a house lot that usually was connected to ag or lo'i. And that's kind of how Hawaiian Homes operates. So unfortunately, in that system, they were only allowed to claim their house was like the house. It wasn't like the yard that they exploded into. It was just like the house. So a lot of the house lots that you see in those records are really, really small because it just was the house. And then the lo'i was kind of just like the lo'i and the banks of the lo'i. And then some of the bigger ag systems were much bigger, but most of it is small. But attached to Kuleana lands was as traditionally was, you still in undeveloped lands could harvest and hunt and gather in the ahupua'a that your Kuleana sat in. So that traditional practice transferred into contemporary law.
Okay.
And so Kuleana landholders, and so this is where people, if you really want to get into the weeds of it, Kuleana landowners have those rights.
Okay.
Not just any Hawaiian. Kuleana landowners, legally. The other stuff we can talk about, but legally are attached to the Kuleana lands. And if you are a Kuleana land holder within the ahupua'a that you sit, you have the right of access for firewood, lumber, medicine, food, from the tippity top of the mountain of that ahupua'a all the way down into the ocean. And that's how that kind of transferred, because that was a traditional connection. And so that maintained. How Hawaiians use it now, but here's the other point of it, right? But you also had responsibilities in that ahupua'a, right? Like Kuleana lands, you had to go clean the awai. You had to show up for konohiki when you had the konohiki patch has to be clean. And that was like, that kept everything going. Anyway, we don't have those responsibilities anymore. Some people just go, oh, I have Kuleana lands, I have all of these rights, and they're not even taking care of the Kuleana lands, right? Or even if it's not even Kuleana lands and you live someplace and you're throwing, like, I have rights to this, and just like the responsibilities of that are so much more than what we're trying to claim. So again, right, there's these stepping stones. Yes, Native Hawaiians should have these accesses, and let's make that happen. But to stop there is actually, you are now settling into using Native Hawaiian rights in a Western concept. And for me, that doesn't, it's just messed up for me. Because again, right, it's not about the thing that happened. It was in the responsibility and the relationship that it comes from. So if we really want to lean into Indigenous relationships and Indigenous practices and the balance of the world, we need to start to really self-reflect in what is a Western right and a relationship, and what is an Indigenous right and relationship. And it's okay if you want to use either or, but don't mistake one for the other, right? You're going to show up to a community meeting, and this might piss a lot of people off, but you show up to a community meeting and you tell them that I am from here and I have something to say, and you cannot do this and you can do this, and I'm a Native Hawaiian and that is my right to say that, and you have to listen. That is a Western right. To simply be and have an opinion and need to be listened to is not a Native Hawaiian right. It is a Western fucking right. Think about it.
Yeah. No, I've never thought about that before.
It's a fucking American right. It's never ever in the history of our fucking people were we able to not lift a finger, contribute in any way, serve in any way, show up as if we are somebody and be listened to. The people that had input were the people that served and worked and showed up. The people that lived and were served, like existed in that space, were considered in the decision. But they weren't necessarily voicing anything in the decision. And that's what separates it. And that's why too, when people say, well, everybody needs to have a voice here, and I'm like, bullshit. That's a fucking Western process. But everybody should be considered in the decision. And that is an Indigenous process. So Western process, decision making, everybody shows up. Everybody should have a voice there. But it's Western. And cool, if you want to do it that way, do it that way. But don't call it an Indigenous process. Because not everybody is smart. Sorry, wrong word. Not everybody is informed. Right?
Wow.
Not everybody is serving. Not everybody is contributing. But in an Indigenous one, those that are informed, those that are serving, those that are contributing, if they are in an Indigenous mindset, they will be making choices and decisions based on everybody, with everybody in mind. And that's the difference. So when we talk, sorry, I know I took a little bit of a turn there, but Kuleana, that's kind of like this thing that we're struggling with. We're stuck in these two systems. And it's okay if we want to pull west, do it, because that's the legal system that we're stuck in. Pull it. But let's not believe there's two things happening. Use it for that. Absolutely, because that's what it's meant for. But don't sit in it as in us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense to me. I think it's a very unique perspective that actually I haven't heard before.
I'm gonna piss a lot of people off.
You're gonna piss the people off, but I think I think that a lot of people are pissed off when you see that sometimes a very privileged outlook on life. Yeah. And it kind of, I think it rubs a lot of people the wrong way sometimes. You're like, what are you saying here? So I think it's a valid perspective, and I'm glad it's one that you put out there.
No, and that's part of the PEVA. But what we have to understand too is I'm not saying what we have to understand is, I think today in this world that we live in today, balance. People are so caught up in this personal attack, non-Hawaiians, non-Indigenous. You can have a conversation, which is lovely, and that's why we can be friends, right? There are some people that take it as I'm like, dude, you weren't there, you didn't do it, I'm not blaming you. You know what I mean? We're not blaming you. But if you cannot sit here and review history with us and be honest about it, then you need some self-reflection. And even the Hawaiians, if you cannot review history without putting blame, because our kupuna did some messed up stuff too, there's history is history, but let's review it and let's see what we've learned from it and where we're landing. And then collectively together, whoever's on the same page with maintaining that relationship and value, let's move. But here's the part where it gets tricky, right? Because the way that we can move and hope everyone's on the same page is by what we've been taught through a Western system is racial division. So let's not fucking beat around that bush. Racial division is a colonial tool. It is not our tool. It's not an Indigenous tool. It was something that was an obvious way to know your people from my people, but it didn't seal the envelope. Seal the envelope was contribution, service, do what I do, get it on the same value system. right? If you look back in history, there were people that weren't from your same lineage that were really much adopted in because they served value, contribution, all of the things. And so we have to move forward. And I think right now it's easy to define who our us is because from those racial, obvious physical attributes. But we can't put up those hard lines because collectively the way the world is shaped right now, we're not only Native Hawaiian. So when there's non-Native Hawaiians that really believe in the values of Hawaii and different indigenous peoples, then I'm like, get on, let's go. But what we have to recognize is there's a reconciliation that has to happen. And the Canadians have talked about this for years and years and years, which I love. And I'm starting to delve into what that journey is for them. But I love that word because we have to reconcile. So, okay, you're not responsible. You didn't do it. I didn't do it. But this is where we're landing. There is racial tension. There is someone's some ahead and some are farther behind. There is inequality. There is social injustice. There's all of these things. That's just the reality of where history has brought us. Are we going to do this together? Okay. Well, you cannot be the lead right now because of that reconciliation. And that's okay. Right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where we have non-Hawaiians that are totally like, yeah, I don't want to be the front guy. Like, that can't happen right now. So we'll advise you, we'll fundraise, we'll move chairs, we'll set up tents, and we'll do all of this stuff because I'm just as important in you, and I believe in this, and I believe in the us, and we're going to do this. And right now, today, you got to go stand up on the stage, and you got to go and make the speech. But at the end of the day, we're going to sit down equal and be like, hey, how do you think that went? What can we do better? What are we seeing that's different? Because again, right, service, contribution, and equal values. But a reconciliation has to happen. And that's what we're trying to navigate. I believe what I'm trying to navigate. Because there's some beautiful non-Native Hawaiian people that I come across that are serving way, beautifully. And then I'm like, okay, how do I put you in a spot where the reconciliation still has to happen and not make you feel that you're less than. Okay, rain.
Okay, rain. Ooh, a break.
Ooh, a break.
Everything runs. Okay. It's raining. Ua is present. We are
moved.
To continue, I love that you brought up a lot of things.
Yeah.
But I think we kind of ended where I really wanted to go with it was bringing up race and racism and always dividing things by the Haules and the Hawaiians and the Western ideology and the Indigenous ideology and it always clashing and I do feel like that's not what's important and it's not where the division's coming from and it's not when I hear you talking and what I hear you asking of the Hawaiian community in our last 30 minutes of conversation is the same thing that you're going to be asking of the Haole community, which is service,
contribution.
Contributing, being of service. And I think this one hasn't been brought up, but what has gotten me really far is service and humility. Just be humble, listen, learn, and just be of service. Stay, literally, the way I want to point to you and the reason that I'm your friend, he's a keeper, is because...
You're a keeper.
Yeah, I did. We were at the, whatever you want to call it. We were doing our thing, and I made myself of service. I was like, there's dishes to be done. I did the dishes. I didn't leave till the work was done. I left with you, and you're like, I like you.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's so important. And just being of service. And I didn't do that to earn points. I did it because that's just the way my mom raised me. And I was like, I can be of service. I'm going to be of service.
Yeah.
And that's the way to be a part of the community. And it doesn't matter which color. It's just be of service. And if you want to make things extra easy for yourself, be humble too. And I love that. I think that's so important. I get really sick of having the race conversation, and I mean, you do have to. It's unfortunate because you, like you were saying, the other thing you said in there, you do have to be aware of it because you have to reconcile.
Yeah.
But I guess we did touch a little bit on humility then, because to reconcile, you have to enter humbly, which is a lot. A lot of people I know can't do that. They can't reconcile because they can't bring themselves to be humble enough to, like, okay, put down the ego and just listen. And it's not about, there's no right or wrong. You don't need to bark back. They're not even barking at you. You're just hearing it wrong because of your perspective. You need to know how to enter the room.
Yeah. And it's much more complicated, right? On both sides. It's super complicated, and we're simplifying it. But if you're lucky enough to be able to have that space to do it, then these are the things we have to really recognize, right? Like the race card, and that's the hard part, right? In Western systems, we have to play the race card. That's the reality of it, because that's how a lot of the world has been operating, and the legal system, like all of this stuff, whether they want to admit it or not, that comes from that. That's a colonial tool, and it exists today. So we can't pull, like, that's the reconciliation, right? We have to be aware of it. We have to sometimes engage in it. Like, I say stupid haole all the time, but sometimes most of the time it's not about color of the skin. It's just the stupidity of the people. Like, it has nothing to do with what they look like. It's absolutely their actions and how stupid they are. I'm sometimes calling brown people stupid haole people, right? So it's like, but that's just, and not everybody does that, and it's still bad. At the end of the day, it's not helpful. It's not a peva at all, right? But it makes me feel good sometimes, right? The petty person in me is just like, Anyway.
Yep. So, I mean, sometimes you gotta let it out.
It's not a perfect system, but at the end of the day, if you have the opportunity to really be able to have because I'm sorry, like, not all white people and non-Hawaiians are open to this conversation.
Yeah.
Right? So the guard of not opening up the space and the humility, it's because half the time we're defending ourselves too, right? So again, there's also that, and really great. I actually have really great conversations, and have been lucky maybe to have stepped into spaces with non-native, non-Indigenous, non-Hawaiians, and have beautiful growth conversations, and have been listened to. And some of the biggest ahas have come from non-Hawaiians and non-natives. Because what I saw this podcast once, little clip of it, and it was a black man, a white man, and a white woman. And they were having a masculine conversation. And the woman was asked to chime in. And the white man the black man looked at her and said, "You're a woman. What makes you think that you can contribute?" And she, like, had the best answer, and I thought it was great. She looked at him and she said something like, "Well, who best to know white privilege than a black man?" Right? White privilege, you don't see a lot of it. Who best to show the mirror to you than someone not in that has white privilege? So, like, in the man to woman, right, conversation, who best to mirror back the strengths and shortcomings of a male is someone who's not male, who has in every way been affected by it. And I thought that was kind of really cool. So I love if it's open. I've had really great conversations with non-Hawaiians that so much want to contribute, so much want to serve. And because they were separated from or not engaged with and not invited into spaces to understand the values and the core relationships, they don't have some good behaviors. But as soon as you sit down with them and you tell them, like, here's the things and these are the values and these are the relationships, they're like, "Oh, I never even understood." And then they start to shift. And that's kind of beautiful. Right? So I don't know, there's no, like, again, right, these are some peva that sometimes will fit into a fracture and won't fit into a fracture, but we gotta try some medicine of it. Yeah.
Well, if we're having this holiday conversation that came from Kuleana lands, and where we are right now is Pila'a.
Yes, we're in Pila'a.
And this is a Kuleana, so to backtrack a little bit, this is a Kuleana land, and the reason that we were able to get to this land is because it's in law that even though you don't own the surrounding land, you are allowed to
enter. We have access, and then we have access in the undeveloped.
And
so, yeah, what was the question?
I was gonna, I was gonna ask how your pops, Carlos Andrade, got him. How do you guys have these Kuleana lands? Yeah.
So every family has a different story. Everybody, and some are just really, really sad, and some are really, really great. And I don't know what you want to label mine, but because for some people it's like anger, and some people it's sad, and others. But the story that I know, and that I kind of, and I might be interpreting it maybe not right on as my father knew it, because he passed a couple years ago, is he is Portuguese Hawaiian. His Portuguese great-grandfather, Raposo, who lived in Kilauea, bought 4 Kuleana lands as an investment. He bought it, so the parcels that we have were a purchase from my full-blooded Portuguese grandpa. And he bought it from a Hawaiian family that had bought it from the original Kuleana holders. I never touched it. Never saw it, never touched it, didn't even visit it. As far as what my dad actually wrote an article about it. And if I'm recalling it correctly, never touched it. And nobody, like some family members knew about it, but no one ever came. And then in the 70s, when my mom was pregnant with my older brother, my dad was at a family party, and he was bitching to one of his aunties about the price of living and not wanting to pay the man and all of this stuff. And she just looked at him and you know, hippie time too, right? My dad, and she just told my dad, oh, what about grandpa's land in Pila'a? Why don't you go over there? And he was like, what land? Right? So this is the first time he heard about it. And she either worked in like the land, some land office in the county or state. And so she taught him how to kind of research, and he went and researched, found the parcels, whatever. And while he was doing that, he talked to his mother and asked her about it. And so how Kuleana land works is in inheritance. And here's the tricky part, and this is why a lot of Kuleana lands have been lost in family, is that if you don't, in your will, apparently I'm not a will lawyer or whatever, but kind of have to say like who you designate as your heir. And I think there's like a little disclaimer at the end, or if we can say, I think they say like, and the remainder estate goes to here. If you don't have that and you miss something that you never knew you had, it gets divided equally with all your children. I think I'm saying that right in its simplest form. And a lot of people didn't know that they had Kuleana lands, right? So great grandpa didn't designate an heir, so it got split to his kids. They didn't designate heirs, it got split to their kids. And then you have my dad's generation right under. So by the time there was 8 children from my great. They had on average 8 children, so that's like 64, right, shares. And then right, my dad's generation. So it already was divided by 64 times technically. And no one knew about it. Until, well, they knew, but no one had really been here. And then my dad got kind of wind of it, and he started to, and then he went and he asked the family, like, what do you guys want? Nobody wanted to live here because there was no water, no electric, bushes. And the surrounding landowner was an asshole. And he was like, got blessings from his mother, and his mother, so you can pass your share either by inheritance, or you can, what they call, quit your claim. You can quit your claim to somebody. And so my grandmother gave her whole share to my father and didn't divide it with his siblings. She just gave her whole share to my dad. Some of her siblings gave their whole shares to my dad, and some of the uncles from my grandmother's uncles, or 1 or 2, gave their share to my dad, because nobody was interested. So what a lot of the cousins if you will, and the community at large don't realize is the shares weren't divided in inheritance. Not all. If someone passes your whole share, it doesn't go to anybody else. So technically, the share that my grandmother held went to my dad. So none of his brothers or sister got. So none of my cousins got. It just went to my dad. And all of the uncles and aunties that gave their share to my dad never stopped with him. So because nobody wanted. The cool thing about my dad was, and my dad, if you don't know, was one of the pioneers of putting Malama Āina and Hoa Āina within the educational institutions, creating formal tracks of it, and really creating a conversation about it on higher levels. And he was one of those guys, and actually one of the guys. So he did all of that research, and it was really outside of Pila'a, but Pila'a was his biggest teacher, I believe, for him not only to understand the legal navigating and the social navigating of it, but also just the personal Hawaiian navigating of it. So he maybe not has been my direct teacher, but has definitely been the example, indirect teacher, because we are horrible learners from our parents, right? But the greatest learners from our parents, because whether we want to admit it or not, they teach us so much. So my dad opened up Pila'a and raised us here, and has been opening it up and tending to it. And the beautiful thing about how he addressed it and kind of existed here was it was for the family. So even though his brothers and sister and the children and his cousins didn't have shares anymore, it was still open for family access. But there were rules applied because you don't get to be a Westerner in the Hawaiian context, right? And that's what I don't think some people didn't understand is, like, all of our cousins would come and, like, we're children, we played, and some went home because it was in the boonies, it was like dark. I remember reading from kerosene lanterns. Our first solar power was the 2 solar panels from Hokulea when they renovated, like when they dry docked Hokulea in the 80s, and then he brought 2 solar panels home and 2 went somewhere else, right? That was our first power, was these solar panels. Our water, he used a gravitation pump. He made it himself from the spring, and then we got our water pumped up to our house, and then we just went to county lines and got our drinking water. Like, so it was super off-grid. And that's how we grew all of our food, and we fished, and like all of the things. But nobody at that time wanted to live like that. So, but it was definitely open, but there was always there was rules. Like, you come, like, go clean a little bit. My cousins, I think, love to go down to Kipuhi Point and fish, and my dad would set them up, let them go camp and do that. But they all had to come and do a little bit of work, and that's the relationship, right? So that's how our family, but there's all of these shares. And one of the things that people lose kuleana, families lose kuleana, was taxes. They weren't able to pay the taxes on it because, unfortunately, up until recently, or in the past generation, the land tax fluctuated with property value around you. So if you got rich neighbors, so that's how, like, all of our coastline lands, our families lost their coastline property because it, like, $1 million, right?
Yeah.
They couldn't pay the taxes, and some are just holding on. And I think there's some tax credit now or something that helps, but a lot of people lost, a lot of families. And then they also lost because of the shares. You have a really small piece of land that's divided, I think, by my children's generation into the 2000s. If I did the math right. So, like, how do you, and then only one person actually tending to it? So for 50 something years, my dad paid the taxes. I think one other uncle would shove taxes into, just, hold on to his share. But even though he wasn't the pure shareholder of all of the kuleana shares, he paid almost 100% of the taxes, or a big portion of it, for 40, 50 years. He did almost 100% of the care of the work here. So there was, but going through all of the land stuff that he understood and the loss of, and it's just a mess. And loss also comes from families fighting, because I've heard of like 4 siblings, beautiful piece of property. No one wants to pay the taxes because you're not paying the taxes. You're not paying the taxes. And then so like I heard one like $1 million lot was the family couldn't agree and let it go because it was the county had pulled the taxes on it. And it was like 15,000, and only one sibling could pay it. And so the sibling said, "Let me pay it, but let me have the shares. I'll pay it, and it'll stay in the family under me." And the other 3 refused.
Wow.
So the county seized it. They didn't get the sale of it. It was taken because of the $15,000 bill, tax bill. So families do it to themselves too, right? And that was a potential thing that my dad was dealing with that he didn't want to pass to us. He didn't want to pass the chaos and the of what that is, because in a traditional system we might have been able to share 2,000 people who cared, who can come and go. And like I used to live in Mangay in the Cook Islands, and they're closer to that, but they still have family issues. But they have they have their leadership that can just, nope, you move, we're dividing, like, and then we can't do that now. So my dad decided to, what the only legal process of it is called a quiet title, which is like quieting the title, like quieting this unrest of shareholders. And what has to happen is that you have to go out and you have to figure out who still has shares, how much shares they have, because some people quit their title to others, some people sold, and he engaged the courts in the system of the quiet title. So the unrest and the legal battles that he's been through, and with family, with Pfluger, who was the last landowner around us, he didn't want to pass that to our generation, with the possibility that we probably couldn't navigate through it and we would have lost it forever. And that's a real thing. Because looking at what he had gone through to quiet title and to go through the process of shares and who owned what and how many shares and being the only person who was tending to this and paying taxes was like, it's huge and it's heavy. So I'm sitting at another space of understanding. So I've been taking care of this one parcel out of 4 for the past about 8 years by myself. And I took it from my dad. I told him, you know what? He was getting old. I'm like, I'll just do it. Just you do whatever you want on the others, but I'll just tend to this. And it's been a struggle. As you can see, it's like I have to catch up. The grass keeps growing. And right now the pigs got into my lo'i. So they they took almost all 100%, maybe 95% of my kalo got taken. Right? Just pigs. And like the wall that you came and helped with for my birthday workday last year, that generational gift that I wanted to give for my birthday, like it's all weedy. I have to, so like I know that like this whole Āina is like, it's not like this fantasy. It's hard, and I'm failing at it, or I'm trying my best. I'm drowning in it. Maybe not failing, but I'm drowning in it. We laugh about snorkels up and extension snorkel, because that's just the reality of it. You can imagine that, and then having to deal with family that are like, well, we want to come to the lo'i and want access, and they haven't lifted a finger, and they don't understand kuleana, and they don't understand all of the layers of what that value and relationship represents and where it comes from, and want to go camping at a beach that we actually don't have camping rights at technically, where we do. We have access to the fish and to hunt and gather, but they just want to come and camp as Westerners camp. They just want to raise hell, drink beer, loud music, bring all their friends, and just eat, leave a fucking mess, and then just wrap it all up and dig. Take fish that they're not not contributing to fishery production, don't understand fishery production, right? Like the take. So not only here, it's like I'm just in common. That's just kind of like the norm everywhere, and so I really feel for kuleana land owners that have multiple shares, and that have really stepped up to take care of it, and then like the family doesn't understand. So there's like, it's super complicated, and there's so much hurt, especially because you know, I have cousins that were like attacked my dad, and I'm just like, ooh, we're on now, right? I'm like, right, defense, but at the same time, like having empathy for the, like, they have no idea. They have no idea. They just are really taking a Western concept of ownership and just driving at it, and just like, no, you have no idea. But understanding that and having love, but at the same time going, no, absolutely not. So we're here because my dad took some heavy hits to quiet unrest and bring and not pass like a really chaotic time and a loss to the next generation. And I like, yeah, it's huge. Sorry.
No. Oh, no.
Sorry.
No, you don't.
No, because there's so much things there. It's just like, that's, I think, the gift that we all, like we talked about, right? If we could heal something today, like what kind of gift is that, that we could tidy up one loose end so our children don't have to deal with it. And look how many loose ends we have as a people. My dad got to do one tidy up. He did a lot, but he got to do that one tidy up for us. Like how many families have like trauma that they could like stop? But that's huge, right? Like there's so much things like we can tidy up that are totally probably going to be misunderstood in our generation, but will look so clean for the next. So, yeah. It's a big gift.
Yeah, he was a big guy, special guy.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, I'm sure I mean, that must just be such a good feeling to have worked so hard for something and passed on something so beautiful to your kids.
It was a bittersweet. It was bittersweet because he still fell out with family, misrepresentation. The community just jumped on any little thing, right? Because of who our neighbor is. And that's the Zuckerberg family, right? Priscilla and Mark Zuckerberg, right? So they bought from Pfluger and were part of the whole lawsuit because they had shares in our family. Like one of my family members sold to them so they could be in part of the lawsuit to claim this land. Like how ridiculous is that, right? So it's like, it's just really, and you know, and because he was so, that family is so high profile, and I say he, and I don't want to dismiss Priscilla because like she's just as like smart and successful as Mark, but like this family that has such high profile attracted even more criticism, right? And like I'm not speaking for or against. It's just like, let's sit in the reality of what that looked like, right? They're huge, and there were unnecessary shots taken just because they were as rich as they were. And there was affiliations or assumed affiliations and all of this stuff. And we sit here and I'm just like, you know, there's good and there's bad. And like, I'm not gonna say you need to like him world, but, and Priscilla and stuff, but in the history of our family being here, the previous owner was an asshole. He was horrible. Not only to us, to all the landowners in Pila'a. All of them. He was a bully. He sent what my dad calls the cronies. After he blocked access. He would rip out our water line. He dumped dead pigs in our springs that we bathed in. Like, polluted, like, you know, like just horrible. He clear cut Pila'a. So just the Pila'a care of Pila'a was horrible. He clear cut Pila'a. That's why we had that huge lawsuit, reservoir. There's a lot of things. He just was like a really bad Hawaiian. He was a bad ali'i. You know what I mean? And he stole that land from his family. Right? And it's just all of this history. And I'm sitting there going, well, if I have to choose between Pfluger and Zuckerberg, I'm like, I kind of like the new guy.
Yeah. Which I think is so interesting because it's like, and I'm so glad you brought this up because you have this new neighbor and it's Zuckerberg.
It is. He's my neighbor.
Yeah, you always like, oh, that's my neighbor. And you always talk about him in like a very kind light. He's like, oh, he's like...
He's my neighbor.
Yeah, and which is so contrasting to the news and everything I hear from everyone else. And yet you're literally on Kuleana lands within his property. And you're like, oh, he's actually like... How would you describe him as a neighbor?
I laugh about it because I've met him a few times. I spent some time with him and his wife, with his children. I get to play with them every year. Not play with them because I do education programs. So the school that they have here, when they are here, they have school, and their teachers ask me to do shoreline walks with them, and they come in when I had Kalo here. They've helped to weed and cut and pull kalo and learn how to make laulaus and my hope, and I do that with the kids because if their kids can love this place the way we do, right? Like, why wouldn't I want them to love it the way we do? So there's that kind of neighbor relationship, but like he's a billionaire. It's just ridiculous, right? Like, I don't even know how much money that is. And it's like, I don't want it because, like, to see how much criticism he has, I'm like, yeah, nope, I don't know if it's worth it. But he's a billionaire. The reality of the situation is he's a billionaire. And I laugh about it with my friends and family. And we're like, oh, billionaires way better to live next to than millionaires. Right? Because billionaires, like in my understanding and how he behaves, is like they just want their privacy. They want to be left alone. They get hounded by paparazzi. Like people sneak on property so they can hide in the bushes and take pictures of this man and his family. Like how ridiculous. Like, yeah, it's ridiculous.
That is ridiculous.
So like I can understand privacy. Like he travels around with an entourage to make sure he lives. Like I would hate to have to be around people all the time like that. Like I can never so who wants that life? He does. Okay. But like millionaires are still trying to like they're not so much privacy. Some of them want attention. Some of them want to be known. Some of them still are on power trips. I don't want a neighbor like that. Let alone what Pfluger had tried to do before they sold this whole section to our neighbors, our current neighbors, is they tried to divvy up Pila'a into gentleman estates, which was 10 to 15 acres as far as, I could be wrong on the acreage, but like a bunch of acreage for a bunch of millionaires to own their mansions and have a goat or a cow or an orange tree and call it agland. Right? So imagine, I think we would have lost Pila'a if that had happened. I think we would have had about 75 to 100 millionaires on this property who super thought of themselves too much, super controlling of their space, power tripping, and would have made it really, really hard for me and my family to be here. So I think if it had gone that way, we would have 100% almost lost Pila'a, and we would have been out. Having one super rich neighbor that just wants to be left alone, as long as we leave him alone. And I'm not saying that he told us that, but like, my dad was super private and respectful of space, and that was our family instruction. Like, you leave us alone, we leave you alone. Like, we'll wave hi when we pass. If you want to say hi and come stop by all means, but we won't bother you. Like, and that's kind of how it's been, and it's been really, really nice. Like, my dad was diagnosed with cancer later in his life when they were owners. Priscilla guys own like a wing in one of the cancer centers in the continent. They like gave him a direct line to the doctor and told the doctor answer the call, like, right? So they were good neighbors. My dad would drive ulu over to them and like give ulu to them. And they like ulu, by the way. It's really funny.
Wow, right? That makes me kind of teary-eyed. Like that,
it's kind of really
imagine,
funny.
Like that's like, you can't have a better neighbor than that. Of just like someone who's like in that desperate of a situation. Like that's like at the end of the movie. Like right? That's like the grand gesture of like, let me help you. Like let me like you. That's so
incredible. Just as neighbors, they've been pretty cool. Like I've got to go and like spend some time with them on the other side I did like show them like we did emus and stuff with the kids and food and take the kids walking and it was really cool and like just like like the kids are so cute and they're some of the most well behaved kids that I've met. Like our local kids, I just want to like and then and their kids are like one of the girls I was carrying because she like her slippers were over here and I took her back and I was carrying her over and she kind of like put her hands on my face and because I was laughing about something. And she goes, I'm so happy because you're here with me. Like, it's like, you know, the sweetest thing. Like, At the end of the day, these kids are just kids and they just like, they want to be kids and they like to get dirty and they don't like to get dirty and they want to take risks and they don't want to take risks. And so it's kind of funny. Yeah, my dad would take ulu to them or to them and they would hand it off to the cook or whatever. But yeah, they just want to be people, and if the space allows them to be people, then they should be people. But then you take the family and their whole thing and you look at what they're doing in the community, right? It's just like amazing. We have some of like they've created these community funds and Kauai has their own personal one. Like they could have done a Hawaii wide where they don't just create these funds and just have someone else run it. Like Hawaii Community Foundation runs it, but they actually go and they visit these sites and if they can and have the opportunity to, they have one-on-one conversations and they really want to get to know. Somebody was one of the security. I don't know if they're supposed to share. They were saying, or somebody was saying that when COVID happened, like Priscilla was with her mask on, was giving shots and doing COVID tests in Lihue. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're super involved and they're young and I think they just want to be a part of something. And they're trying, and they, again, reconcile the wealth. They have to figure out how they're doing that. Yeah. But here, I'll take these guys over the last one.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like they're being of service and being humble, which is kind of...
It's kind of cool. Right? But then they live this outrageous, like, I don't even want to, like, it's outrageous. The attentions. I'm like, gosh, poor guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've definitely changed. It's really nice to hear this from an actual neighbor of Mark Zuckerberg because it's completely changed my perspective on who he is. And I mean, the way the community views him is like the devil. And you they
view him for the devil. It's the money. I think he's not, they can't even, like, most people can't even get past the money to get to so you just have to be like, it is what it is. They're just judging. It's the money and the actions that they see. And people are pissed because of history. And he's an easy target. Like, he's buying a lot of land. I don't know how much because I don't follow him. I'm not the Zuckerberg investigator. Like, I got stuff to do. I'm not gonna track him. But I hear like, oh, he's bought this and he bought that. Like, how much is enough? I'm like, well, honestly, I don't know, because there is that question: how much is enough? But at the same time, I'm like, I see the benefit of large tracts of land being held in one estate, because those in the future become conservation zones. Because if they are not developers, and I'm so hoping my neighbor's not a developer, and he hasn't been in any of his actions right now, is like a lot of these guys turn their lands into huge tracts of conservation and community lands, right? That's how Limahuli Garden was established, right? We had a big tract owner, the Wickman family, and who was just like, I want you to turn this into something for the community, and he did, right? So a lot of our big tracts are preserved, if you will, because of this. And then hopefully, if they're really, really great in understanding what's going on, won't further develop. And I'm crossing my fingers with my neighbor. If that, I'm hoping that's on the horizon.
That was great. I'm glad we touched on Zuckerberg because you have a very unique perspective on him. If we want to, I kind of just wanted to talk about one more thing, and that is, like I earlier said, I feel like you have like 3 really big pillars of knowledge. And the third one is like you have a very formal Western education Like
Yeah.
you went to school, like you learned, like, so I that's like, I think that I love the diversity that you have within your mind and how you operate and the way you look at the world because of it.
We call that crazy.
Oh,
You
is
like
that
my
what they call
crazy?
it? Yeah, I like your crazy. I'm a big fan of it. I wish it would spread. Um, but what what was your formal education like, and how has it led to what you're doing now, kind of as a career path, which I think is super inspiring because your whole job is just connecting to Āina and understanding place. Like that's sick.
Oh, geez. Yeah, it's cool. I can't complain. I do love it. So formal job, like formal education. So I think I played the school game well. I was always good at the school game. And I just want to say that because I don't think intelligence, there's all kinds of intelligence. That was just what I was intelligent in. And I did well. I understood the rules and I could play them. So, and I also was the middle child, right? We're the fighters and we're just like, see me. I mean, I exist. But so I got into Kamehameha. My older brother got in there before me. I followed him in, and then he kind of just was like, I think the school thing bored him. He's just like, I want to go surfing, or no, just playing. But so he ended up going to another school when I stayed in Kamehameha. And then the cool thing I just have to mention, because it's a journey that has affected my journey as well. It's my parents started to go back to school when me and my brothers started to go back to school. So as soon as my younger brother went to preschool, my parents both went back to school. So my education, my formal education, institutional education, was alongside seeing my parents in theirs.
That's very cool.
And I don't think I recognize it till like we talk about it now as an adult. So they got their AA, and then when they got their AA out of KCC and they finished that, we went to Hilo for 2 years so they could finish their bachelor's there. At the time, my older brother went to KS, and we went there, and we lived with my grandparents, my mother's parents. And the cool thing about that was my younger brother was inserted into Kayapuni immersion program. And he just so happened to be inserted into the leading class. So the class of 99 is the leading class of Hawaiian immersion. And he was put there. So it kind of changed our whole world. Because not only, all of the things we did, we grew our own food, we lived off the land. My dad was caretaking all over, a surfer, musician. My mom was, an artist and a surfer and a sailor as well. And like we had this life, but it was never really identified in that formal way of like the protest of who we are and Hawaiian kind things, right? And being there and being pushed into that community, it changed the trajectory of like even how I moved. Because I babysat all those brats, right? So the whole, like all those Kayapuni kids, we just crack up. I was their babysitter. I had to like take care of them because the parents we moved as a unit, right? All the parents and all the families. So at Kamehameha in Big Island, I got introduced to that. And then I went to Kamehameha for 6 years. And I think because of those 2 years surrounded by who now I understand are like these huge influential people in the movement, right? These are the founders of the Hawaiian language movement. Like those were the families we were with and spent so much time with. That definitely put me in paths in Kamehameha. And then while I was doing that, my parents were in graduate school. My mom was getting her MFA and my dad was getting his master's, and then he went on to PhD. And I was in an age where I didn't want to pay attention to them, but I wanted to be in Hawaii. And I didn't want to be, and then they went in to teach at UH Manoa as professors at Kamakakuokalani.
Your parents?
My parents. So they're both professors there and developed their own track. So my mother developed the Halauolaka track, which is the visual arts track in Hawaiian studies at the university. And my father developed the Malama Āina track in Kamakakuokalani in the university. So that's why I was saying like he's part of that that pioneering of the formalities of what Malama Āina is defined on, and has put a lot of people on that track. He created it in a formal way. So I knew I wanted to go to college because I didn't know where else to go. And I wanted to stay in Hawaii, but I didn't want to stay by my parents. So I just ended up in Hilo. And it was kind of cool because familiar, it was, I think my parents were really kind of raised us in a way. They didn't have a plan for us. They're just like, be good human beings, right?
That's a good
It's
rule to follow.
yeah, just like don't be an asshole. So I think, yeah, like they didn't have like you have to be a doctor or whatever. It's just like just don't be a drag and be a good human being and serve and contribute. So I went there and then did the school thing, played with all of the courses and everything, and just kind of ended up dropping out and went sailing because I fell in with the voyaging canoes because we grew up sailing. And so there's this huge like interweaving of formal education and then life. And then I met my ex-husband, had 3 children, and did the mom thing and raised kids in Punanaleo and Kayapuni and tried to do that and then did the same thing my parents did. When my kids got to the age of preschool, I went back to school because I couldn't I recognized that I needed to be challenged and there was more that I could do and there was more that I needed. There was more purpose for me than just being the housewife, office worker, KTA, cashier. And so I went back to school and my kids were in school. And so I have a BA in Hawaiian Studies from Hilo. And I did marine science was my jam because I love being in the ocean. So I thought, and science, Western science is a system I understand and my brain gets. So I did well there. But I couldn't do the classes because my children were in school, right? Back and forth. So I got a certificate in marine science and a certificate in Pacific Island Studies. And then I jumped onto graduate school and got my master's out of Manoa in Hawaiian Studies through the Malama Āina track. And that was hard because it was my dad's track. So I had to kind of be, because of nepotism and all of those beautiful things, I had to like really outsource not only advisors, but because my parents couldn't be my committee. So they could mentor me like informally, but I had to get formal outside of them. So that was fun and interesting. But what I learned from that and having to be pushed out and not having them to be formal mentors, I didn't have a formal human mentor, which pushed me into understanding that, again, familiar relationships, is that our world and our elder siblings are always trying to tell us something. And so that pushed me into where I am today, where I don't have a lot of human mentors. I have a lot of people that I look up to and a lot of examples of how I want to move through the world. But my biggest teachers have been the shorelines and the mountains and the streams and being in it in different roles and relationships, being a fisherman, being a scientist, being a Hawaiian scientist, being someone who's looking at production, right? Like through all of those lenses, because of that weird kind of relationship that I couldn't depend on my parents to be advisors. So I had to go and look for all of these other sources. And I stumbled into being like, oh, yeah, which is kind of cool. And which has put me where I am. So after that, I got my degree and then I started to work and run a nonprofit because I'm bossy, right? The other hat, right? My other title. I have these other skills like driving trailers and sailing and killing pigs and fishing and diving and killing fish and cleaning fish and cooking and like all of those things. And bossy. I could run programs somewhat chaotically, but not in chaos, and gather people. And I was good at it, and I'm good at it in certain ways. So, and that kind of just took me, and I guess with the example of my parents, because I think one beautiful, if anything, that this story sticks with me is when my parents started to go back to school. My mother's really good at math, which is really weird because she's an artist, right? Like those brain things don't work together a lot of the time. She went back to be a math teacher. That was her original track. And my dad was like, why are you doing that? And she's like, well, job, security, like all of the things. I can do it. It won't kill me if I do it. And he said, okay, wait, stop. If we had all the money in the world, what would you do? If money was not an option, like a worry. And she's like, I'd do art, of course. He's like, then just do that. And the cool thing in leaning into that, she has been able to make a career out of art. And I think, and her other skills of pushing her own envelopes, because she is also a pioneer in Native art and Indigenous art across the internationally. And she's been able to do that. So I think I lean into that. I'm like, money, position, security is not the determining factor of the choice that I make. And kind of leaning into like what I'm meant to do and purpose, if you will, has brought me to a place I never could have imagined. And it's better than what I could have imagined. I don't know if that answers your question. But yeah, so that's my formal education. But also leaning into like the informal choices, the doors, opening door. Like when doors open for you, it's just like, yeah, cool. That sounds like fun. Or that sounds like I'll give it a go once. And those doors have brought me to here. And it's kind of a cool place to be.
And they've brought you, I mean, I know that's kind of a metaphorical here, but like it's also brought you to the Northern Hawaiian Islands.
Yeah.
And to like way upstream, farther than anybody gets to go. And it's brought you into the details of those places, because you do a lot of observation with your job with O'opu and Opihi and whatever the heck you're looking at all day over.
Everything. Yeah, no, so that was the cool journey, right? In that master's program, right? The door was, okay, to get the master's, malama Āina, what am I going to do? Again, right? I have children. I can't waste my time. I got to be here. What can I leave behind? Product wise, and for the next, like, I'm like, okay, I have kids, they're all young. The intertidal and the ocean was always special to me. Ocean's special to me. That was my caregiver, my babysitter, my companion, for all of us that grew up in islands, right? Most of us in Hawaii. That's what the ocean is to us. So for my children too, I'm like, how do I mix that with some education for my children, or like to make sure that they can still come along to serve their age group, and I still want to do it. Like, so my graduate work was Pilina Kai, and it was really looking at, and begun to have I have Western science, I understand that well. I was able to kind of mix and mash, like, how do we inquire through the system, but also honor Pilina relationships? And at that time, I was really heavy into like, no, relationships guide everything. It was really, everything's about relationships. So at that time in 2008, there's this huge integration of Western systems with Indigenous knowledge, conversation happening. And I was in the middle of that at UH Hilo. And it kind of frustrated me because they were trying to fit knowledge with system, and you can't do that, right? Knowledge is a product of a system. So if you're trying to get Indigenous knowledge and tie it into a system, a Western system, it's not a fit. You have to, it's a product, right? So you have to pull back and go into the system, so Indigenous system, and see how the Indigenous system can be activated with it, Western systems, and how do they now complement each other? And at the end of the day, it's not to just complement. What is science for? It's what is inquiry for? Inquiry is to solve problems. So what problem are we trying to solve? And that is not a science question. That's a humanity question, right? So there's all of these conversations. And for me, I recognized it early. I'm like, I don't care if it's Western science, because I'm solving an Indigenous problem, because it's based on an Indigenous relationship. So Pilina Kai was my project. So how do I enhance and establish and build your relationship to the ocean, so you now can interact and inquire and problem solve? Not because you want to hold a museum piece there, but because we want production and we want to tend to these places as family. So that's where that started. And I was able to make a degree out of it. But also the trajectory of how I engage and the programs and all the inquiries. And in that journey was open to Papahana Moko Akea because of this class ku'ula at UH Hilo with Misaki Takabayashi and the NOAA staff at the time, which was Aulani Wilhelm, like these like visionary people that just could see this potential of something that was so scary for everybody else. Right? Because it challenged a lot of what people took power from, right? This degree is my degree and you can't say this. And they're going, no, there's power here and there's like, and it's valuable and it can add to it. So I got kind of pulled along in that. And thankfully, I fell in with Pilina Kai becoming a inquiry process on the intertidal and doing that for 10 years. And then 10 years later, realizing that we were inquiring through a Western relationship and then pulling back and having to say, we've been doing this wrong. And then looking into production and being like, okay, so we're not looking at Opihi for Opihi population. We're looking at Opihi to look at Opihi production. That's different. Those are different inquiries. So in order to understand Opihi production, we need to understand what drives production. So it opened up a whole nother conversation. And then when we recognize the drivers of production for Opihi, we recognize that population doesn't tell us production, because the drivers do. And different shorelines have different ranges of the same driver. So you're going to get a higher production or a lower production naturally, and it has nothing to do with harvest. And if you understand that, then you can actually make rules or make behaviors and advise behaviors that support production and not presence and absence, which is what our fisheries is based on, right? Not based on, but that's kind of like, oh, there's no opihi, shut it down. Oh, there's plenty of opihi. Like we take everything. And it's so not productive. So this idea of drivers and the idea of production really framed from our learning from what the intertidal taught us. And then we could take that framework and you can place it on any system. So you take that framework of drivers and production and you put it in family. So what are the drivers of production within a family? Love, safety, support, like all of these other things and different ranges of it. And if you go too much, you collapse it. Too little, collapse it. But somewhere in the range in the middle, you can actually measure production within a family. And you put that in the stream system, you put that up in the forest, you put that in like any system, and it's kind of cool. And it's just like, and then this understanding, bringing my neighbor back into it, right? It's just like, you need financial stability in this world for production. But there is too much production where you collapse your system. If you've got too much money, there is a point of collapse. And I want to argue, like, too rich, you kind of collapse your production. You have a success in one area, but like your ability to move, right? An ability for privacy, ability to not be attacked everywhere. Like there's definitely a line, right? So this idea of drivers, this idea of product and inquiring based on production has really shaped everything that we do now. It's shaped how we develop PEVA, how we develop inquiry. And then we say yes to the people that want us to inquire for them or with them, or there's questions that have to answer. So Intertidal has taught us that. Being up at Papahana Moko Akea has given us a really great example of clear, loud example of what those drivers will do without human intervention, and seeing it super clear and being like, holy crap, and then being able to apply here. So we've developed an OPH management plan because we looked at production and we know how. We have a theory that if you follow these drivers and you follow supporting these drivers, we can harvest and we can rest and we can do all of these things and never have to shut down completely. And balance. We got balance. So we're doing that in the streams now, right? And right now we're in the process of the first 10 years of like just identifying the drivers. Like we don't know. Like Pila'a stream is not the cleanest water stream on the island. It comes through pasture and it's like not even, it goes through a reservoir and all of this stuff. And I've seen the four out of the 5 opu in the stream. I've seen some really things that people are like, it's that people have said are measures of health. And I'm like, opu presence is not a measure of health because they are native resilient species. And we want them to have clean water, but their presence doesn't tell us it's clean. There are other drivers that we should be looking at. And so that's been directing traffic for us and me in what I do, like identifying drivers. And I think it's powerful when we start to look at the world. We talk about it all the time, right? When you look at the world through surplus production, you're going to see different things. But if you look at the world through deficit, do we have OPH? Do we not have OPH? You're going to come up with a whole different set of rules. And I much rather, and that's where Āina Momona comes in. It's not only a destination, it's the potential of how we look at the world. When we see people, when we see spaces, when we're looking at it, we can choose to look at this valley and go, oh shit, there's like 98% invasive. And that's the deficit. And I can look at this space and be like, what's the possibility? I can put in koi'a, I can put in alpaca, I can put in no nayo, I can put in a'ali'i, I can put in all of these things. I can try to bring back food orchards. I can try to get our lo'i going. I can bring people down here and they can, you know what I mean? Like there's definitely a different conversation when you start to view the world through Āina Momona or that surplus. And I think that kind of like sums up how I'm trying to walk through the world now. I'm not perfect. I still like see shortcomings and I'm like, and then I have to reset and I have to check myself. And that happens once in a while, not as much as it should probably, but it happens once in a while. But like, I truly believe that we talked about race before and we talked about some Hawaiian issues before too. It's like, we also have to remember that we cannot vision away from something. We always have to vision towards something. We have to recognize where we're coming from. But if we are only trying to get away from, we're probably not going to land in a great spot, right? Imagine that, right? If we just turned your back to away from, and you just looked at what you're trying to get away from, you could go in any direction and you could potentially land someplace better. Where you might, if you're trying to get away from the fire, but you don't know if there's a fire behind you or not, like you might end up in another fire. So you want to like take a moment and really try to figure out, what are we visioning towards? Where are we trying to get to? And work towards that. Always aware of what we're trying not to include in that, but not solely to get away from something. And I think that's what we've been doing in survival mode for a really, really long time, right? We don't want to we want our land back. And so we're just working away from the idea of our stolen lands, which is a strategy, but could we do it better? Why don't we so how do we get our lands back? Or how do we become back in a relationship with our lands? It's a different conversation than our land was stolen, right? There's different conversations. We want our language back. E ola mau ko'olelo Hawaii. The language shall live on. Right now, a lot of the conversation is either it's been taken away from us and we keep getting back to that. Yeah, it was taken away from us. Yes, that did happen. And this happened and this happened. But are you clearly trying to get language back? Right? And then we have the diverted arguments of language where it's just yeah, we want language back. E ola mau ko'olelo Hawaii, but you got to do it like this and like this and like this. Well, is that really serving you? Do we really need linguistical checklists on Hawaiian language in daily life? I absolutely know and believe and support the language preservation on that level in a halau. But to tell our community that they have to speak it this way in their homes and amongst friends and in everyday language, we're not gonna e ola mau ko'olelo Hawaii. You know what I mean? So that this is the reconciliation, right? How do we look at surplus? How do we look at deficit? How do we plan for surplus? How do we not plan for away from deficit? But also, what is our goal and are we achieving it? Are we creating, like I like to say too, and it's a hard pill to swallow for me, some communities, the best thing for them is for me not to be there. And that's for the benefit of the community, I have to step away because I'm so bossy. One reason, there's others. No, but you know what I mean? And then other people need to be bossy. Other people need to step up and hold responsibility. Other people need luhi. And I'm fine with that. It's hard to recognize in the middle of it, but I'm getting a little better at it. But you know, so it's there's a lot. But that's I guess formally some of that journey in academics.
And I think you just wrapped it up really perfectly. And I think, and like, and you also have me excited. Tomorrow, we're going to go and like,
I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, check it out and actually like participate in that action and relationship and what it's like to have kilo and what's the other word you use? Starts with the P.
Pilina.
Relationship. Pilina.
Pilina.
Which means relationship?
It's an active relationship.
An active
Again,
relationship.
language, right?
Yeah.
Pili is like to be bond, close, whatever. And pilina adds like this ing to it.
And there's a few things that we haven't touched on that I'm really excited to talk about, which we'll do tomorrow. And the episode, I'll link it below so you can go. It'll already be out. And then we'll put this out later. But before we end it, I just wanted to tell you something as just as a friend and someone who feels super blessed to be in your life. I never got to meet your pops, but you did invite me to his memorial service, and I attended.
Oh, nice.
And
so it was a blur.
You know, I bet. But for me, I really felt like I got to know him through the stories that were told. Beautiful story after beautiful story, and then a funny story, and then like just everybody going up and sharing these memories of your dad. And I was so inspired. I walked away from that so inspired without not even knowing who he is personally, because these stories ranged. This beautiful life of someone who has strove for these big things of traveling the world and sailing to other parts of Polynesia and traveling with Taj and like all like these crazy big things. And then yet you'd have stories of him spending all day surfing Bacala and like just living off mangoes and bumming meals off
and
of
tearing
people.
down houses and not building a single house as brand new, but recycled material.
Exactly. And then to hear even these stories that I'm just getting of what he's done with this place and what he's done for the education system that exists and living with that luhi and like, it's beautiful and it inspires me, and I get that same inspiration and excitement watching you and watching the way you're living your life. And it even chokes me up to think about, because it's crazy, but I'm just so, I'm sure he's so proud, and I'm so grateful to feel like I get to know your pops through you, and I get to know you. Every day that we hang out, I feel like I just get a better understanding of who you are, and I'm so grateful to have you in my life.
The crazy. You get a glimpse more and more into the crazy.
Please boss me around anytime you want.
Awesome. No, thank you. Thank you for allowing this space, not physically, but like the share and the conversation and the holo tomorrow.
Well, thank you for physically allowing this space. I love you. Thank you so much.
Mwah.
Awesome. That was great.